Okay, so we're talking about documenting code. You guys have talked about I know in 330, Dr. Goders and Dr. Hutchings really pushed documenting hard, which is a good thing. But when you talk about documenting code, why do we document our code? What's the purpose of documenting code?
So we or other people can go back and look at it and figure out what's going on.
Okay, so there's a couple of audiences. So that particular example, the person who's going to look at the raw code, I'm going to call those people the maintainers. The people that are going to go back and look at the code and try to figure out what you did. Has anybody ever gone back to your own code before and found out, like, look, what was I thinking when I did that? Have you done that before? I do that all the time, like yesterday's code. You know? So okay, so to make it easier to understand what we do. What else? Why else do we document code?
Makes it easier for others to use it.
Okay, others use it. So we have people that are going to use your code. A lot of times we're going to use, especially like open source projects or APIs and whatnot, we want people to use it. We need to document it for those. I'll call those the developer audience, that people are going to develop code. You need to document it so that it's easier for them to use it. They may not actually look at the inside like the maintainer does. What else?
I was just gonna say, like, putting comments in your code also forces you to really think about what you're coding a little more.
Okay, forces you to think. It's kind of like, yeah.
Like you might be like, oh wait, this kind of doesn't make sense, and then maybe rethink it or something. So as a practice, it kind of forces you.
The practice to think about what you're doing. Good, good. Yeah, like when you write a paper, it's like, well, think about what you actually did. You realize, I didn't really think about it that well. Any other thoughts on documenting code?
So one thing about the maintainers, right? At a university, like, maintainers change every year. Right? So it's pretty important to have documentation, because all of you guys are going to graduate, right? And within half a year or 3 years, right? Somebody else is going to be trying to use or build or modify your code.
I'm getting really stung by this right now. I'm not a good documenter, and I have not encouraged my students to do this. I haven't pushed it as much. I've got like a whole bunch of students who've left, and I've got all this stuff I have to support, and I'm dying right now. But just so you know, like just the other day, went to a GitHub repository in 2018 to read a certain student's. I had to look at his raw code to figure out what was going on. So I know my students right now, we are documenting. Half our time should be spent documenting, because we've got a lot of really important technology that we're using for which there's very little documentation. It's my own fault, so I'm paying the price, but we're going to do that. So I want to just show you some there's a website that shows some favorite comments. We're going to look at some fun these are actual comments found in code. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So the guy's saying here, don't try to optimize this. Okay, here's another one. Okay. What's a compiler? Compilers don't look at comments, right? Okay, here's some others. You see comments like that. It's like he just basically copied the code as the. Here's another one. So people just warning you here. I've done that myself. There's a lot of really fun ones. So a lot of these comments suggest that some comments are better than others. What makes a good comment for the maintainer, by the way? What do you think? You had a good comment. What's good and what's bad? Yes. If you explain the purpose, why we're doing something, okay.
Like things that are self-evident don't need to be, so like, don't write unnecessarily, but for things that are more complicated that aren't always immediately obvious, it might be a good idea to at least put in, this is what it's doing. So at least when they read through the code, they have a basic idea of, oh, this is what we're trying to get to, as opposed to them trying to work out like, why is this happening?
It's a tricky balance because you can add too much comments, like unnecessary comments, or you can add too much that gets in the way, or you can add not enough. Usually not enough. When in doubt, you want to err on too much. But it's important to try to, especially in difficult concepts. We're talking about the middle of the code. We're not talking about the APIs, but in the middle of the code, when you want to say you want to try to give insight into a difficult concept. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? Many insight into something that may be very difficult to follow. And all of us, we struggle with this here. And so, yes, Dr. Nelson.
I mean, you really should be doing it with assertions, but when you have assumptions, you really should document them. Although just documenting them usually isn't enough, but certainly they should be documented. This works for these kinds of things if you know there are limitations to the code.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot. You should doc any assumptions there, because a lot of times you don't know the assumptions. I still have code. We have projects I'm working with. Something works, and I cannot figure out why it works. It shouldn't work, but it does, and I'm not going to change it. And so one of the projects we're working on is to Kate, and he's working on this. He's going to help me with this one. We got to figure out why it works when we think it shouldn't work and comment it appropriately. So this is a problem. Okay, so I just want to end those. Those are kind of just fun. There's a lot of them out there that you can look at that are a lot of fun. So what I want to talk about the developer. On the developer side, we can comment our APIs. Is anybody ever, let's go to my code here. Anybody ever done API commenting before? What does it mean to document your API? This is for the developer.
Well, I was working at a company where I did a lot of API development, but they had a standard language called RAML. It was based off YAML. I think it's still around. It's MuleSoft created it. It was working, but RAML was basically a way you could like document all the parts of your API and stuff and kind of things, and you could easily put it into like some kind of format or what else. It wasn't as like verbose as doing like a markdown document or something.
Okay.
But it gave you.
What are you trying to document when you're documenting the API? What is it you're documenting?
You're documenting, I guess, like what calls do what you can pass to them, and also documenting the kind of JSON format of what it expects to get as well. If you're passing JSON.
Right, we're going to document primarily the function calls, the classes, the data structures. We're documenting the code to the user of the code. And there's a lot of tools out there that do it. I'm going to just show you a couple ones. For example, JavaDoc is one that I used a while back. I'm going to just show you this web page here. So what JavaDoc does is there are certain tags that you can add into your document that allows you, that will actually document the code. So for example, here's a comment in Java. This is a comment. Notice that there's like HTML, there's links, HTML links, there's tags, and there are these other special comments here that are used that will take this code and turn it into a web page that documents the actual code. So rather than creating a separate web page that describes the code you're trying to develop, what you do is you add special comments and tags into the comment section, and so that it'll make a really nice document for you. So if this is actual code, and then if you run the JavaDoc tool, it'll generate web pages. Then they put this in a really nice, much nicer. This doesn't look very nice to look at. We don't look at this, although we can read it. We go to the web page that this generates that documents the API. Has anybody looked at an open source project and seen really nice API documents that explain what this function does, what the parameters are, what it returns? That's what this is doing. And so we write the code, we're actually writing a lot of the documentation. So
Scroll down, it might show what the website.
oh, does it show it?
This is resulting at HTML right there.
Okay, yeah, this is the resulting HTML for this method. Notice here's the name of the method. There's the actual prototype, and then it has the parameters and the return type. So, and this is probably part of a bigger document where all of the different classes are all linked together. And so this becomes really important when you're trying to maintain and provide code. So someone else can use it easier. So I think it was Jeff, you talked on Monday about testing, is that right? Was it who? Dr. Nelson, I think said, well, someone said twice as much time is spent testing as you are coding. Well, we also have to document. Document is part of the testing. So maybe it's 1/4 coding, 1/4 documenting, and 2/4 testing, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but if it's done right, you spend a lot of your time documenting and you're adding these tags. So this is one for Java Doc. Another one I wanted to show you was Doxygen. Doxygen is popular. We've used it in our lab for C. Whoops, I copied the tag wrong there. But this generates documentation from source code, and there's a lot of, we've used this for C. Has anybody else used any of these documentation there's a lot of them out there. So Sphinx is the one we're going to talk about today for Python. But anybody else used another one of these? You talked about RAML, I guess. I haven't heard of, maybe I've heard of it, but I don't remember.
It's very close to YAML. It's a slightly modified format similar to YAML, but designed for documenting APIs. It's developed by MuleSoft, but it's open source.
Okay.
But yeah.
Has anybody ever done this in your code, added these tags to your code before?
Yeah, I think in 240 they have CS240. And that was really cool that you could generate really clean documentation.
So is it only 240? Anybody else besides Caden? Be brave. Okay. Only two of you taken 240?
Well, I think
But they don't have you do it in 240 anymore, or
still do it.
Yeah, I think they're being shy, but yeah,
they're being shy? Okay, I'm like, wait a minute here. It's just
Still
so.
have you do that.
So this is an important part of documentation. Is this API documentation? I'm going to describe this here. So, Sphinx is a documentation tool that it's used for. Sphinx is actually used for a lot. It's not just API documentation, but we're gonna go through Sphinx today. That's one of the things we use Sphinx for is API documentation, but it's also used for documenting projects as a whole. So I talked about the audience of source code documentation. One is the maintainer, the other is the developer. There's another. Can you think of anybody else that might use code? I'm going to call them the user. Sometimes people just use the code. They don't actually call the APIs. They just run the programs. And sometimes we have to provide documentation for them. And that often is outside of your source code. You don't put user guides inside your source code. It doesn't make sense. But oftentimes we'll create project websites or user websites that do that. And so there's the Sphinx what's nice about Sphinx is you use it for both API documentation and the whole project documentation. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about Sphinx. But before we do that, I want to talk about Python Docstring. Does anybody know what a docstring is? Yes, what's a docstring?
It's use 3 quotation marks. And what happens is that it's usually the first thing in there, and you say what it does, and sometimes you might list what variables it uses. But the idea is that when you're in an IDE and you hover over a function to see what it does, it returns the docstring. So if you write the docstring,
oh, look at that! I didn't know you could hover. There you go.
When you hover over the function, people can actually get the gist of what it's supposed to do, what parameters it needs. And so it's a nice, quick, easy way to get a quick glimpse at what it's supposed to be doing.
Okay, so yeah, in Python, the docstring is actually a property of your file. So we have it's a string, and Dr. Goder's mentioned it a little bit about docstrings. But if you look, I'm going to go through an example here. In this example here, I actually have this. I have a docstring. I have docstrings. So this is a docstring associated with a module. Okay. And then the docstring associated with a class, the docstrings go after. This confused me, by the way. I'm used to normally with C and Java, you put the string associated before you define it. But for Python, there's probably some reason for that. Who's the Python? Dr. Lunderman's not here. Or who's our expert? But this is the docstring for the class. This follows right after the definition of the class. This is the docstring for the module. Notice I have three different comments. This is the module docstring, because it's the first one. I have triple, what is that character? Apostrophe? Is that what that is? We call that tick. I call it tick, but I think then we have three quotes. This, by the way, you could use pound. This is another comment. I'm not sure why VS Code renders it green and these. Maybe there's probably a reason. And you get three quotation marks. So multi-line comments, you can use a three tick or three apostrophes. You can use three quotations, or a single line comment. You can use the pound sign there. Okay. Okay. So then this is the multi-line docstring associated with the class vending machine. And in this class, I can actually print it. So I've got a main function, and I can vend one. So I created this new object. I can print the docstring in my code. Okay. And I can also have docstrings associated with my functions. You see the functions here. This is a little docstring that tells me I initialized my class. Adds a coin to the vending machine. You see my little comments that I use here. These are all actually part of the object, and I can print them out. So if I run this, let's go to my, whoops, I got to exit out of it. I can quit this. I can say Python 3, whoops. Three vending.py. So notice what it did. Actually, this is printing the help. Why is it doing that? So first it did the docstring. So it's a docstring for vending, and it actually printed it out. Okay, docstring for add coin. I think is what that's supposed to be. Adds a coin. So I can actually print the docstring in my programs as well. There's also this notion on the help. Does anybody use the help inside of Python? Okay, if I say help vend one, it will go through and print all of the docstrings and all of the methods associated with that. So for example, here you see this line here, help vend one. And I ran that. And then so this is going to then, this is the help. This is help on vending machine and module main object. And it goes through, it tells me the classes, all the functions, and prints the docstrings there. So, and it talks about the data descriptions and all kinds. Have you guys used the help before?
Oh, no, that's cool.
Kind of cool there. So, so that's useful to use for Python, is to have the docstrings. Now, the docstrings, more than just providing, we want the API to be formatted properly. And so, like I showed you the Davadoc and the Doxygen, we use special tags that will actually, we use special tags that can format your API documentation well. And for Sphinx uses a format called restructured text. Does anybody use .rts files? Anybody use restructured text? I don't like it, by the way. It has odd, it's kind of old school. It has special white space stuff that I have to deal with. But if you're going to use Sphinx, at some point you have to use some restructured text. So what I'm going to do now is show you, I'm going to install Sphinx, and I'm going to show you how I use Sphinx to generate some documentation, some API documentation. So Dr. Nelson showed us how to do like Python environments. I use Docker, by the way. I like Docker, so I'm going to use a Docker container here. So I've got this in here. We're going to learn about Docker on Friday. And so what Docker does is that I've got an image that has Python already installed, and I'm going to mount one of my demo on there so I can run my demo. So I'm going to run it here. Okay, so I've got a new Docker container running, and I'm going to run a couple of commands here just to install Sphinx. Sphinx is pretty easy to install. So I'm going to do apt get install Python 3-Sphinx. Okay. So this is basically, I've got an environment, my container that I'm running is just a bare Ubuntu image with Python 3.8 installed. And then I'm going to run, let's see, where am I? Okay, I'm going to go to the temp directory. I mounted the temp directory to my vending machine example. Okay, and I'm going to do a Sphinx quick start. Quick start docs. Okay, so what this is going to do, this is going to build a new Sphinx project. A Sphinx project is going to be like a set of I'm going to create web pages essentially. And so it's going to ask me a lot of questions about the project. And so I'm going to say I don't need separate build source directories. Project name, I'm going to call it temp, Sphinx, author name. Whoops, I got that. Project release, project language, source files, suffix. You can use text or RST restructured test. Yes. Okay. Yes. How do I do that here? Size. I think I can just do. This is a. Yeah. Is that better?
Is this running on the Mac or are you logged in?
It's running on my Mac. Yeah, I'm running a Docker image that's basically Ubuntu running on my Mac.
It's a bunch of systems.
Yeah. So it's Friday's presentation. Make sure you come because Docker. After I went Dr. Lundergan last year, I'm sold on Docker. So I've got all these images. You can have one with different environments. It's probably heavy. It's heavier than what Dr. Nelson discussed on the environment.
Not as heavy as a full virtual machine.
But it's not as heavy as a full virtual machine. I just ran. There's a command called Docker create. I create an image with Ubuntu 18.2. I think I can't remember which one. You can pick any one you want. And then I could have installed one with. Then I installed Python manually. I cloned my image. Now I'm going to and I could actually clone this so that it's not just Ubuntu and Python, but it's also Ubuntu, Python, and Sphinx. But I wanted to show you his here. So I'm going to use a restructured text, name your master document, okay, AutoDoc. This is one here. AutoDoc, typically when you run, the default is that AutoDoc is automatically creating documents for your API. So I'm going to say yes here. Normally, if you say no, it's not going to look for my files. Doc test. Dr. Goder showed us about doc test, right? Doc test says it'll automatically test the code snippet in your doc test blocks. I didn't put that. You can put test in your comment too. I'm not going to have it do that. Enter Sphinx. You can have interlinks between them. You can have to-dos. There's a to-do module where if have anybody put to-dos inside your code comments before? That's in fact, I know VS Code makes it yellow or orange when you do that. But there's actually a mode here where you can actually have the to-dos. There's a format you do for your to-dos, and it'll actually put special notes in your comment you generate. But I'm not going to do the to-do module. Coverage. So coverage checks for, I'm going to say yes. If you don't have the doc strings, it'll give you a warning. So this will check to make sure I have doc strings. I'm going to say yes on that. I'm not sure about I don't even know what any of this stuff is, to be honest. There's all kinds of things. Looks interesting, GitHub pages, Jekyll. You can link this in with Jekyll, all kinds of stuff. Makefile, yes. Yes. Okay, so it created a project, the docs directory with all of the stuff that I need, okay? And I'm going to go to, I've got a couple of windows. This is a window.
Good question. Can it go across different programming languages?
Yes.
Or is it just Python?
No. Sphinx can do any languages. In fact,
mix of both in your software.
yeah, you can mix it. I haven't. It gets more complicated, but you can do it. So
cool.
You can actually do it there. And now, in fact, in the tags, Sphinx supports multiple different types of tags. There's a dozen different tags. We're going to do the worst one, which is the default restructured text one. There's another, like Google has their own style that is probably the most popular. NumPy has a style. But we're going to do the restructured text one just because that's sort of what the default is. Okay, so I've installed Sphinx. I have run the setup. I can actually run, if I go to docs, I can actually make, if I just say make HTML, this is going to make a bunch of web pages here. This is a default project. Let's see. I find those project. Where is it? Open file. This is in my docs.html. Okay, so this is, oh, look, I spelled my name wrong, you know, it created, so this created the base document that I'm using, but I don't have anything in it. This is what they created. It doesn't have the module index because I didn't actually link in the module. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to go in, for adding modules. Whoa, that was, okay, so I'm gonna, this is the config, the conf.py in my Sphinx project. I'm going to say my modules are actually, I'm adding to the path the directory above. I made a docs directory underneath my vending machine directory. And so this will add my code to the path. Okay, and sorry, I'm going back and forth between dark and the other change I'm going to make is there's an index.rst file. This is the default file it created. That this is an example of restructured text, by the way. This is what restructured text looks like. You know, it's kind of like Markdown, but it's a different format. And so it's making a table of contents. You saw there's a search bar, there's a module index, there's all this stuff. This is what was generated. I'm going to add my modules here, auto module, it's called vending, and I'm going to add all the members. Okay, so that I modified the default index here. When I do that, sorry, I'm going to make the HTML again, and read the sources, and let's go see how my pages were changed. Whoops. Find it. Here's my vending. What happened there? See that? Sometimes it might be my browser.
Do a full refresh.
So what is it? I forget how you do a full.
Windows would be like Control F5 with.
Dar?
Maybe it didn't add that there. What did I do wrong here? So this is my Sphinx demo docs index.rst. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I had a space there. It's very, like I said, restructured task, where you put the spaces and stuff for me, it's tricky. So what it did, it automatically, in addition to this other page, it added this module, class vending machine, and here's the doc string that was created for the module, and here's some interesting, it tells me the different functions inside this class. Okay, and I have little comments for each one. Okay, now this is not quite enough though, because we don't have the special tags. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to create those tags. Now I've got another version of vending. It's called Vending Sphinx. And the tags that this is the restructured text tags here. There's a thing called a param. So right here we said param amount. So this is a special tag saying this is a parameter to the function. The name of the function is amount. And here's a little string that is associated with that parameter. Okay, so then you have to give it the type, type, the name of the parameter, and then the type int. And so these are two tags that you can give. There's lots of other tags that you can use as well, but I just want to show you those. And so in addition then for this change, it provides change after purchasing. It returns, this is a string, it'll say what it actually returns and the type of return. So these are just a couple of returns, and R type and param and type are just four tags that you can use for restructured tests. So if I go back to my index, and then I'm not going to do vending, but I'm going to do vending Sphinx. This has the text. So what do you think is going to happen when I generate it? What's going to be different about the text, the HTML that it generates? What do you think will be added? By adding these tags, this just added the comments that are associated with each function. By adding the tags, what might be added? It's going to tell me more about the parameters used in each of these functions and their type. So if I go and I run, let's make HTML again. Okay, it ran it. Let's hopefully think that this worked. You notice here that it says, in addition to my docstring associated with that function, it tells me the parameters, the amount, which is an int, and it tells me it's the amount of the coin that you put in. And on this change, it provides change after purchasing. It returns the amount of change, and the return type is an int. And so you get in a habit of always adding these both a comment and the details about the parameters and the return value. Then all this code, then Sphinx and others will generate a lot of, will generate this for you. Okay. Any questions so far on this? Now, by the way, you'll notice that the next activity, your follow-up activity for this is I want you to generate HTML pages for your CSV. The project you talked, what was the project that you were discussing? Was it CSV parsing?
Yeah.
Okay. So the CSV parsing project that we've been working on, this seems to be the one that we're sort of carrying through. What I'd like you to do is to add Java doc strings to your class. How many lines of code is it, by the way? Anybody who's done it? Your CSV parsing? How many lines of code? I want to try to get a feel. No one to volunteer how big their code is? Somebody done it? Okay, how many lines? Just give me a rough idea. How many lines of code did you have? Just give me a guess. 100, 200? 50? Okay. So that shouldn't be that much. This should be. So what I want you to do is go back to your CSV parser, add doc strings, and add tags for the parameters. And I want you to generate a web page using Sphinx for your code. Okay, that's the activity for this module. I want to also show you. There's a lot about restructured text. There's whole documents. We can see here restructured. I always have to do every time I do cheat sheet. This is what I do because I have to do a cheat sheet for restructured tests. So there's some good ones. It's for italic, you use 1 asterisk, bold 2. There's this link with this underscore. They have a verbatim using, these are, what do we call this character? I don't know the official name. The backtick is, yeah, that one. Headings. So you do headings. You put before and after as a subtitle, and there's actually a whole bunch of. This one doesn't show you. There's multiple layers, but there's a different set of symbols that you use. So this is for title. You put the asterisks before and after. For subtitle, it's just after, and then there's a whole. I think there's pluses. There's a whole hierarchy of things you need to do. Oh, here it is. This tells you what some of the different characters are. Here's how you do links. There's cross-referencing. You often use this colon, as you saw here, for cross-referencing. What else is highlighted? In the directives, you see this. You have to tab properly. You have to add a space. One thing that frustrates me is you always have to put these extra lines. If you don't, it messes up. And I always forget to do that. So anyway, there's all kinds of documents up. Here's tables. They're a little bit cumbersome, frankly, but you can basically do everything. Here's an example of the table of contents here with, notice the tabbing and the properties with the colon. And you're importing files like this. So you can read some details there. But I want to show you a project that we've done, SpiderNet here. Where's our Jordy's here with us. And one of the things we've done with SpiderNet, where's my link for SpiderNet? Ben, sorry, Ben, I didn't show you. I didn't mean to. Oh, I'm really trying to figure out what Ben's doing, right? You've got multiple. Let me open up it. So it's our GitHub, BYU CCL. we have a project called SpiderNet. And in this project, we have a GitHub page. We also have a web page and documentation. So it has its own public web page hosted by GitHub that we generate every time we build. So as part of the build process, Dr. Goders was talking about actions for doing testing. Well, one of the actions we also do is we automatically generate the documentation from two things. We have documentation from the raw source code that is auto-generated, and we have, Jordy, we're using restructured text, aren't we, for that? And then we have all the restructured text for all the documents that we create for it as well. And so it does all the testing and all the document generating. So this is the actual GitHub repository, and we have a README that points us to the various pages. It doesn't link to the, we also have it hosted outside Jordy at Python, right? What's it, do you know, there's a link. I thought that was linked here. I forget where it was, but anyway, so if you go look at the actual SpiderNet page here, by the way, this is old. We need to update this here. So we're going to update that. But if you go to the documentation, we have this documentation. And with this documentation, it has the actual references for the API, but then it has installation, tutorials, and so forth. All of this written in restructured text and generated with Sphinx. Okay, so Sphinx is one of the rules that we use. So, here you'll see in this example, we've got welcome, links to the various places you can learn about it. We've got some very simple examples here on the home page. This sort of style of how to install it, history, and so forth. Then we have a little tutorial that's all done in restructured text. So, and then a reference guide. This reference is the one I wanted to point you to. This is for the API summary. We have an API summary. And so, for example, netlist. So the netlist here, this is generated. Is this all inside the Java doc, I guess, isn't it here? So this is all from the actual source code. This is all, so these web pages are generated from comments in the source code itself. So notice that not only does it tell you what this class does, but it has examples, all written in restructured text. We can look at this netlist.html. Let's actually go to the source, SpiderNet. Help me out, Jordy. It's an IR netlist, PY. And you can see here that, notice here we have this is our docstring. Here we have the examples. And this is using restructured text syntax. Here's an example, and it does this. Notice that when you have this, this is what you get. How did it get? So it generated this is actual, sort of source, make it look like source code. So this is all of the comment that generated this page. It lists all of the methods. And notice all of it tells us what they do. And I can actually click. So if I want a method like clone, it brings me a new page, on what the clone function does. Okay. So if I'm trying to think of where's like a parameter, just think of net lists. It doesn't list the parameters here, does it? Oh, do I expand? Okay, here's some detail, the parameters. I was hoping to find an object that you can actually chase the types through. So it looks like we got a few missing links there. But that's the idea here, is that for someone who's using SpiderNet, so SpiderNet, which is a project that we're using to represent netlists in Python, we want people to use it, so we try to make it as easy for them to use. We don't necessarily want them to look at the code, although they're welcome to and help us fix bugs. We're trying to make it easier for them to use. And so that's why we have this API summary. So on this, though, we have, notice that on our documentation, it's not just, we have the developer's guide, but we have other things. We have reference material, we have tutorials, all that we create in the docs folder of the project. So The intent here is we're providing documentation for the maintainer. And actually, if we look at them, do we have any comments inside raw code? I don't know, Jordy, I haven't looked at to do here. Notice this. To do, we should have a DRC that makes it. Yeah, in Sphinx can actually generate a list of all the to-dos as well from your source. So the idea here is we have comments for the maintainer, we have comments for the developer, and we have comments for the user in the form of this, this overall web page that's generated every time we make projects. So what'll happen is Jordy's working on a new release, and as part of the release, not only does it have to pass all the tests, but all the document has to be generated to be consistent as well. That's one of the actions that's created. And then when we're done, Jordy, when it's done, it updates. How does the action work? Is it updates the actual HTML files that are in the docs? Is that right? So it gets committed as a part of that. I'm not exactly sure how that works.
So the source code itself, we upload it as a Python package, and we have to update that. The website itself is posted on GitHub Pages, so it's a different process to update that. So we keep the repository for GitHub Pages actually different from the master, just so that we can make sure everything is
Right. So you're not automatically messing up the master. That makes sense. Okay. One last thing I want to mention is Read the Docs. Read the Docs is a site that hosts documentation for open source projects. So they have over 100,000 open source projects hosted on Read the Docs. And so this is a place that we're doing SpiderNet on GitHub Pages. Read the Docs is another site that does it. And most of these are actually generated, a lot of these are generated by Sphinx. So for example, Project X-Ray is on here, isn't it? So Project X-Ray. Let's see, Project X-Ray. Sorry, I was going to find Project X-Ray. I believe the Read the Docs. So this is a project that some of you in our computing boot camp will participate in, Project X-Ray. But there's hosted on Read the Docs is essentially a manual, a user manual for how to use the Project X-Ray. Now, Project X-Ray has Python code. How many different languages of code are in Project X-Ray? Python, C, C++, Tickle, Java. There's some Bash, there's some scripts and stuff too, I think, aren't there? I mean, there might be a dozen languages in this particular project hosts it all. So that's what's nice about the Sphinx project. Yes?
Is this developed at BYU, or is this an open source project that you guys are contributing?
Project X-Ray?
Yeah.
Project X-Ray, it's an open source project we're contributing to.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of people
Is
that.
it similar to how they've there was another group that made an open source kind of code set for the Lattice FPGA?
Yes, I think Project X-Ray supports Lattice. I don't know.
Is that under that?
Well, that's Project Ice Storm.
Project Ice Storm, which
Okay.
is based on Project X-Ray, isn't it?
Well, I think
It's, no,
No.
because X-Ray is just 7 series.
Oh, that's right. But SemiFlow actually, right.
I think Lattice ones were the first to have a full open source toolchain
Right.
developed for them.
Yeah. So it's called, what's it called again?
Ice Storm.
Ice Storm.
Ice Storm.
Project Ice Storm. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is all I had on Sphinx and Read the Docs. What I guess, like I say, your activity for this is to create doc strings for the code that you created, and generate HTML pages of your doc string and include the special tags that provide the types of the parameters that you use. If you want to get more detail, there's one thing I forgot to say. I mentioned about Sphinx. Sphinx, you don't have to use restructured text for Sphinx. In fact, most people don't. There's a couple of other styles. There's dozens of other styles. The most popular one is called Google. It's called a Google style. So Google.
Not Napoleon?
Yeah. I don't know if they're the exact Napoleon. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a project called Sphinx
The
Napoleon.
extension's called
The
Napoleon.
extension in Sphinx is called Napoleon, and what it does is it provides support for both the NumPy and the Google doc strings. So if you don't like, this is, it says, are you tired of writing doc strings that look like this? And my answer is yes, okay. And then what you can do, this is the Google Python style guide. This is what it looks like. Comments a little easier to read. You can actually very easily use those. So the Google Python style guide is provided here. There's also another one. There's the NumPy style guide as well. It's challenging. There's so many. It's like, which style guide do you use? You know.
This is for comments in your code.
Comments in your code. When you write your comments in your code, you have to use, if you want to use these special tags, you have to decide on which format you're using. Are you using the default restructured text, or do you want to use something more fancy like Python?
But even your index.rst is plugins so that you don't have to write RST there.
I haven't done that. Yes, you can do
I
it.
tried and failed, but they are there. So.
I know for the index, for I have always used the index RST. I just, you know how it is. You don't want to venture too far, but I know you can do it. I haven't done it.
I didn't have success, but I didn't put much time in. So.
All right, any other last questions before we wrap up? Yes. Well, Sphinx is most common for Python. I don't know which is most common for others. I think Sphinx is used a lot for open source projects just because it's not just the API documentation, but it builds everything together. But in terms of what's most common, I know for C, we've used Doxygen for C, C++, JavaDoc for Java. I guess I'm not experienced enough to know which one is most common for each language.
And even when like Doxygen's used for C++, it seems like these days it's like, oh, well, we'll still have a big Sphinx page that then links to our Doxygen and other things. So
yeah,
at the top level, it's always Sphinx.
Yeah, it seems like the Sphinx is used to create the big project, and then they kind of link to the Doxygen stuff. I can't even keep up. My guess is that Doxygen is probably out of date, and there's always these new things coming out faster than I can keep up. I think the point here of this discussion is you should be documenting your functions and so forth with doc strings or whatever. They're not called doc strings for C, they're just comments for C and Java. And then use some sort of API formatting tool to generate the format. That's the intent here. And we want to get you familiar with Sphinx so you can get started, see the power behind Sphinx in the documentation. In fact, our sponsors at Google have been interested in having us convert to Sphinx rather than Jekyll. I don't even, I don't know.
I don't know if they care that much.
I don't know, but I don't know the differences. Okay, with no other questions then, thanks. And we'll come back Friday for sure for Docker. When Dr. Lundgren talked Docker, it changed my life, Doc.
I was gonna say one thing we missed at some point, I don't know, you could try running it thing, but we've talked about a linter, but I suggest you go try running Pylint on your code, and Pylint will find everything you did wrong and complain to you. I don't know, do you have Pylint?
Can you install it?
Just pip install Pylint.
It'll actually check to make sure you put in the comments. You can take Pylint.
Oh.
Was it install pip?
You need like a three, I think.
What did I do wrong?
Python 3-pip.
On 3-pip?
Yeah.
This is the problem with one of these Dockers. It's a bare bones.
I think now you have two pips. like a Python 3 and a Python 2.
So that could be a problem.
Try Python 3-Pylint. Try that.
Python 3.
No, like apt. Try apt install.
Apt install.
Python 3-Pylint.
But this is on a Docker. This is on a Docker container, so it's garbage. When I exit, it's gonna all go away. So I'm not worried about anything in my system because I can mess it up and I'm not gonna clone it. So I'm not. If this is on my Mac, believe me, I just messed my Mac totally up. So that's why I don't do it here. So okay, unable to locate it.
Yeah, okay. I guess you have to go through pip.
But app search.
So okay, I did install pip though, right? So can I go pip?
Yeah. Did you install it? You stopped.
Stop it.
Oh, the Python 3.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's pip or pip3, it'll find it. All good. You have that now? Oh, you were there.
I'll just let's let this one finish. Okay. This might take a while. Okay, then I do. By the way, with Docker, what's nice is like once you get it all right, you make a script that basically gets it all right for you. So, it is really hard to make these all.
GCC versions? Wow, you're getting.
Okay, so then now what do I do?
Pylint? Oh, pip install Pylint.
Except I'm scared to run because Mike is going to really complain.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So
That's why I'm confident there will be things to look at, yeah. It always complains.
We will learn something.
okay, so then when I
Pylint, and then maybe just point it at one of your files. You can probably it'll probably just find them in the directory, but yeah, sure. Here we go. Okay.
oh 1.3. Wow. Okay. So yeah.
But if you improve something, then next time it'll be like, your new rating is this, last time it was 1.
Trailing white spaces.
You're not using an auto formatter, so if you use an auto formatter, it would put in a lot of these things.
Trailing white, final new line missing, bad indentation. Module name vending doesn't conform to snake style case name.
Enough lengths you can pass the Pylint. It'll fix some of them.
String statement has no effect. Attribute vend sum doesn't conform to snake style. Okay. I'm obviously not I'm not a Python. So
Just some snake case.
too many position arguments for method call. Too many
Yell
That
at
is
you.
the Pythonic way.
Pythonic way. Snake style. What's snake style? Like
The underscore stuff.
like
Say
underscore
vend underscore sum instead of.
and sum.
Yeah, I'm a camel case guy, so
Yeah, it's hard to make your brain switch, huh?
Wow, but I'm so embarrassed. 1.3 out of 10. So, Dr. Goders, man, I'm glad you mentioned that. We probably, but when you're doing like the documentation, one of the actions would be a linter, and you'd have to pass the linter before you commit.
So yeah, one
So we talked
project,
about the-
I was gonna say, one project we commit to enforces this, and it's hard. It's like, you have too many branches in your function. You have too many local variables in your function. Break them up into smaller functions. Like, it's picky.
Like, yeah, so you can tie the Pylinter into the unit testing, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the GitHub action. So when you try and commit, it'll run this and then say, you have to fix all these things before you can.
So if you have a Python project, then it has to pass.
VTR.
It's Python?
Well, all the scripts are.
All the scripts
In
are.
fact, I'm the one that added the check. So I'm just checking myself now. I regretted it.
Okay, so by the way, just so you know, for Docker, I'm gonna exit this Docker container. When I exit it, actually, it's still gonna be around, but I didn't save it, I didn't commit it, so I'd have to go back and reinstall. But that's okay because I installed 2 pips and all that. Okay, well, thanks. That's the end of today's module.